today we have for you a very special guest who is extremely heavily involved in our parent organization, Kashmiri Overseas Association, of which we are the youth branch. And he has some secret slash not so secret talent slash work that also kind of connects. We'll get back to that. But I will let him introduce himself. Ashwani ji, do you want to give a quick 2-minute spiel of who you are, what you do, personal, like job wise, KOA wise?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Surbi, for having me on this podcast. And you can call me Ashwani Bhaiya, as most of the KOA youth does. Um, my name is Ashwani Kaul. I live in Durham, North Carolina. In terms of introduction, my education and my formal training is in computer science. All in all, I have a bachelor's degree in information technology from University of Delhi, and then I have a master's in comp science from UNC Charlotte. Um, I work in tech consulting. I've been doing that for about 20 years now. I've worked in healthcare, worked in wellness and real estate space. Um, Lately, I spend a lot of time uh, working and managing teams that do growth marketing, and we act as fractional marketing and CIO organization for a bunch of our clients. Uh, Besides that, so I am a software engineer, but I also consider myself a bit of a musician. I love enjoying music. I play guitar. I am an avid cyclist. I haven't been on a bike in a while, but I am a very avid cyclist. And I am a baker. All of the things that are of interest to me, I think all of my passions are things where I personally feel that requires more muscle memory to build and learn than something that is cerebral. So whether it's cycling, learning how to fix bikes, learning to play the guitar, or learning to bake bread, um, all of these passions require some elbow grease, which I miss in my primary day job. For KOA, I've been associated with the organization for about 14 to 15 years now. Both my wife and I have been volunteer at our local level. We've hosted events. We've been part of our local chapter. I've been the chapter president for quite a while. And then I became the director for my zone. This is my fourth term as a director, and this is my second year as the VP of the organization. Um, Me being associated with KOA primarily is me trying to fill up a gap wherein I was born, brought up in Delhi, so I never had Kashmiri friends. The four Kashmiri kids that were in my school were me, my sister, and my Masi's sons. So I never had Kashmiri friends growing up, neither in school or in college. So this was a place where I found that I wanted to connect to people my age, younger, who are not related, but learn about them, learn where they grew up. Many of whom were born in Kashmir but had to move out during the exodus. Many of whom were not born in Kashmir. Majority of our youth group just learning from them on their journey of like having grown up in US but still being so rooted and grounded and connecting to the Kashmiri culture and bit more selfishly having that connection for my own kids growing up, just having that connection there of some semblance of being a Kashmiri. Um, so that's my reason to be associated with KOA, and KOA Youth for me is the most excited program. Like I was asked in my first term as a director to be the youth liaison between the KOA board and the KOA youth group, and I pounced on that opportunity primarily because I saw that I was filling in a gap wherein most of the board members that were at the board at that time were probably 10 years, if not more, older than me. And I kind of found myself being the middleman between them and KOA youth who were in their maybe late teens, early 20s, and understood that it's going to be a hard thing to for both groups to understand each other. So I was like, it was an exciting opportunity for me. And as I always say, I think KOA Youth is something that I'm really excited about because I see how the organization is shaping and growing. and I see how youth uh, are keeping themselves connected to the Kashmiri culture and helping it grow. And I see them taking over the organization very soon, the parent organization, and also helping us build some sort of a good common platform that all Kashmiri Pandits can connect around the world. So that's my connection with Keva Youth.
Welcome to Season 2, Episode 4, Telvor Addictions and Cultural Connections.
Yeah, and you've set me up perfectly for the next couple of questions I was going to ask, kind of about the variety of hats I think you don within KOA. You mentioned already, I think almost all of them, serving as your zone 6 director, zonal director, and then VP. I think you started in 2022. You are also on the IT committee, IT team, which definitely lends itself to your professional background, and also working as like the youth liaison. I know that the area that you live in is not extremely overflowing with Kashmiris, and I know we've had this conversation, especially with some of our youth reps from that area. So I'm curious as to what drove you to kind of establish that chapter. Like, was it established before you got there as a director, or did you do a lot of that groundwork, foundation building?
So, chapter establishing, I think I wouldn't say a chapter per se, but we had a pretty good group of Kashmiri families in the area. I would specifically call out Seema Kak, and then Fula Auntie and Suresh Uncle. Suresh Uncle is Suresh Sas. He was the director from the zone before I was. He's been with the organization for the longest time. I would call those people out as sort of the people who sort of grounded and got everybody together and got the group going. When I connected with the group, it was essentially, I would say, 5 to 7 families, and we would meet on either festivals or probably once or twice during the year at somebody's place for a dinner and just keep us connected. But what happened was that as that group kept meeting more regularly, we started taking over more responsibility. That group would host some functions, and then eventually they sort of gave that responsibility over to me and my wife Shweta. We took over, and it came to a point where, like, what we started seeing was that grad students from around, and we fortunately happened to be in an area where we are literally like within a 10 to 15 mile radius of Duke, UNC, and NC State. Three pretty well-known schools known for engineering and medical and a bunch of other disciplines. And we would have a lot of students come over, and we started seeing students come in more regularly to attend the events. And then we saw those students bring their girlfriends and their girlfriends to the event. Eventually, those better halves became spouses, girlfriends, or boyfriends. And then we've seen those students now become more active members of the area. They've like grown up, they've had their kids. We are seeing a second, third generation of those students coming through. So the group became pretty big. We just got connected because Seema saw Shweta and I at an event, and they noticed Shweta wearing Dejhor, and she just introduced herself, and we got connected. Um, I honestly was like, I wasn't seeking out meeting Kashmiri families, but then when I met the Kashmiri families, they were here. We were pretty intrigued and were like, this is like pretty fun group of people. I can practice a bit of my Kashmiri, as broken as it is, and we back then when we got introduced to the group, Shweta and I were freshly married and just 2 or 3 years out of grad school, still living young lives, and we got invited over at a Friday night to have some mutts and batta, and I was like, we're not saying no to that thing. So the group has grown quite a bit from there, and I think that's where we started talking about like getting the chapter organized. And Suresh Uncle, who was the zonal director, asked me to take over the chapter presidency, and I was chapter president for quite a while before I became zonal director. And primarily the goal was that, I mean, we were still not very connected to the main organization, but just to keep our group going is what something that like drove me. I just wanted to have those, like it was so much fun to meet everybody for Hera. It was so much fun to like connect with people and talk to them and keep our Kashmiri culture going. Um, that's how the chapter came about. We just said, followed the footsteps of the leaders like shoulders of giants that were already here. So we're just in the right place.
Yeah, and I think that is really important for, I guess, any listeners or anybody else that comes across our content. If you live in an area where you're feeling that you're kind of the only Kashmiri or some of the only Kashmiris, it is still possible to stay connected and kind of build up. It's a long process, but there are people definitely to help you out and people who have gone through those experiences. But you didn't stop there. Once you became director, you have now jumped into this VP role. And how has that change and transition been, adding along a whole new set, because you are still director, but you're adding on a whole new set of roles and responsibilities?
Yeah, it's been an interesting change. And again, I think the change has been that, again, as you mentioned, like um, I do like to wear multiple hats, and I do get bored if I am not keeping myself busy. I was doing a bunch of other things besides just being the director, so I was tapped on to take over the VP role and essentially, um, one, helping the executive team look at a bunch of pieces because of my consulting and background in tech. I think that comes quite handy in helping the organization uh, work better. And I noticed, like, because we've grown so organically, we need a lot more structure. We need a lot more technology in place for us to scale up. So I think that's where I found places where I could make some difference, could help, um, could push the agenda and formalize KOA Youth as a program, because that's another piece that we've been talking to the youth team and also talking amongst the board and the executive leadership, is that um, KOA Youth isn't still a formalized. I mean, it's a program that we recognize and we support and we love, but it's not formalized in the SOP yet,
Yeah.
right? It's something that, so and I am like, kudos to you guys for taking that first draft of writing, at least writing the initial part of that SOP on like how you guys structure yourselves and how do you guys get zonal reps, how do you guys appoint a director that could be then announced by the board, and we're now building on top of that on like how do we get youth membership built in, because that's very important for us to recognize and also put in paper. And I think fortunately came became part of this organization and got introduced to the youth group at a time when we realized that a lot of these things were not missing on purpose. It's just that the youth group was not grown up yet. We're actually seeing the first generation of Kashmiri Pandits who were born here grow up, come into that youth role, and now are looking for a different meaning to what it means to be Kashmiri, a different set of aesthetics. I mean, as much as we hate it or we like it, you guys were born in the US. You're an American citizen first. You are Indian by heritage and you are Kashmiri by your culture. So there is that different grounding that you guys bring, but then also I'm so impressed with how much of the culture you guys understand, and many of you also speak the language very well. Um, so that to me is like, I think that's one thing that I do keep reiterating with everybody, is that if there is one program that I would put my heart and soul behind, would be KOA Youth. I think that's where the future of the organization is, and that was my main goal.
Yeah, and I mean, I've been with the organization now for just a little over 3 years, and I've definitely seen the growth in our projects and our teams. And I know that you have been such a huge part of that throughout my time, and even previously, like from what I've heard from older youth board members, is you have always been such a supporter and championing and pushing for our freedom to explore and do things that may seem risky, I think, to some of the rest of the board members, which is totally understandable. But you've kind of found the knack and the ways to navigate that pretty big gap that exists. And so I know you touched upon the fact that you want to help cultivate this next generation of Kashmiri Pandits, especially a lot of them who have grown up here, born here. But I'm curious as to how you anticipate the youth organization growing from what you saw back then versus now.
I think strategically, long term, we're not just preserving culture. I think we're just sort of helping it grow again.
And I think that has been kind of a huge part of our mission, especially using social media, is not only to connect us with people in our area or the United States, and then even extending that to India, but also kind of connect us to a more of a global community. And I think what you're saying like hits the nail right on the head about what we want to use the youth organization and work with the parent organization to kind of do. And with all of your roles and with from zonal director to VP to youth liaison and IT, that's not kind of the only ways you've stayed connected or worked on preserving that culture. And I think you touched upon it just a tiny bit there when you mentioned you like to bake. And so you have another alias that you're kind of known by, and your involvement in kind of the food aspect of Kashmiri culture. So I would love to hear from you. You run, your account is called Breadwala, right? If I'm correct.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
So you're involved in baking a lot of different things, but I think also a lot of Kashmiri kandar based
Some
flat
stuff,
bread,
yes. Yeah.
bread, some stuff, Telvors.
Telvor.
So I definitely want to hear from you about what that is like, because I know that, you know, all of us are just waiting till we can get back to India so we can have some of that, you know, bakar khani, kandar ki roti. Like when we go to Delhi, we don't even, it's not even like, oh, we'll go tomorrow. We have to tell all our family to preemptively buy
Same
that
day.
before
Yep.
we land. And like for me, I actually was born in India and I lived in Jammu for like 2 years when I was young. And we lived in Janipur, and the Kandar is like 2-3 houses down from where we lived. And so even now when we go back to Jammu, like my mom is like, okay, we have to go to the Kandar, but like only ghar wala Kandar, like we have to go
Of
there.
course.
And so there are a lot of memories connected to the Kandar and food. And people love it. People love eating it, but people don't really take the step to kind of replicate it here. And you've kind of done that. So I'm curious as to what made you start to do that, or how you, even the process of how you went about kind of developing those recipes.
So I think multiple things. One, I am a big foodie, so love eating food, love exploring things, but also love cooking. So it's like I come from a family where we like to eat, but we also like to host and serve, unlike all Kashmiris are. I am also a bit of a history buff and a geography buff, and I really take pride in the Kashmiri cuisine and the intricacies of the food that we cook, and how, like, generally, I think, coming from that historic and geographic background and like how the community developed, I'm very intrigued by the fact that Kashmiri cuisine, Kashmiri language has very little in common with the rest of the country. Whereas if you see food and language in Afghanistan, if you see food and language in Iran, Pashto and Persian have more words in common with Kashmiri, more
Yeah.
foods in common with Kashmiri than any other parts of the India. And it's how humans evolved, it's how trade routes were, and how like similar climates and how you had availability of things, and how the cuisine developed. So coming back to cooking, so My dadi was a really good cook. Like I know everybody's dadi cooks really well, and people might take offense to this, but my dadi was a really good cook. Like people still like, she passed away when I was in 11th grade, in years, but like I meet people and people still remember things that she cooked. And almost all of her children, including my dad, inherited a lot of that. My dad is an amazing cook. He's really so good that whenever he's in town, and they're going to be, my parents are coming soon, whenever he's in town, my friends are flocking the house waiting for him to come in and cook. So cooking has been in the blood and in the genes. I've cooked all my life ever since I was in school. I cooked while I was in grad school. So I would always cook. Baking to me was always the next level challenge, because baking, once you get into it, it challenges the engineer in you, because unlike cooking food, wherein you can do course corrections all the way until the thing's ready, baking, you have to be very precise with your measurements and you have to do it right at each step. So there is no middle ground in, like, it'll be okay. You either get a good loaf of bread or it's brick. There's no middle ground. So it's like
Yeah, the saying that cooking is an art, but baking is a science is very
absolutely,
correct.
absolutely. My recipes for all of my breads are in spreadsheets. Like, everything is so precise. Like even water that I use is measured in grams. It's like everything has to be so precise. Um, so I had tried my hands with baking breads over years and failed, and it's one of those things that I told you initially, was that I'm really intrigued by disciplines that require like really hard effort to learn. And baking is one of those things. Baking is something that you can see hundreds, if not thousands, of YouTube videos. You can read books, but until you fail 1,000 times, you're not getting a good bread out of it. You have to do it. There is no shortcut. So that way, like the discipline of baking, like entices me a lot. Um, I think genetically coming from Kashmir, and this is something I tell to a lot of my friends, a lot of my um, customers when I sell at farmers market, is that I come from a part of India where we didn't make rotis or bread, but like other parts in the Middle East, in Iran, and in Europe, each neighborhood had their own baker. This is not something that you will find in the rest of the country. This is something that is very common if you go look at Iran, in Middle Eastern cultures, and then in Europe, each neighborhood has their own baker. And the baker's whole job, baker is not getting filthy rich making bread, but it is something as like it's a noble passion. It's something that somebody always wants. You have to make bread at a decent cost and to make it fresh every day. And this is something that Kashmir had, and I was like, not much talked about until recently. So it's always been very intriguing. I started baking breads in early 2019. Is like I'd been trying a few recipes, and suddenly a loaf of bread arrived, and was like, "Oh, I can make bread."
You really beat the pandemic boom in
I did.
baking.
I did. I was very annoyed at pandemic, because during pandemic everybody wanted to be a baker, and I couldn't find my bread flour on store shelves anymore. So I had to go, which was a good thing, because I found that I live 30 miles away from a mill that has been in operation since 1776. So fresh ground organic flour, and we literally in the neighborhood, like they supply their flour to a bunch of bakeries around the country, and we live close by. So yeah, I started baking 2019. Once I made first of my first few loaves, I was like, this is getting too easy. I need the next challenge, is where I dwelled into this world of sourdough breads. And what sourdough is, and this is something that I really take to my heart, and I like to share it with everybody and like to educate people, is that sourdough is not a flavor of bread. It's a method of making bread, wherein you don't use yeast that you buy in the market. You use lactobacillus, that's the bacteria, but you grow it by yourselves by adding water and flour, mixing water and flour and putting it aside, and like So I started in that journey. What sourdough does is that it gives you a slightly tangy flavor in the bread when you like it, but it develops amazing texture. Um, so I looked that up, and then I tried different breads. And this one time, there's a local bakery down in Durham, and they sell at farmers market. It's close to my house. They had this bread with sesame seeds on it.
Yeah.
It was it was in a shape of an eight, an infinity sign, and that bread is called fougasse. So if anybody wants to look into it, it's something in the Provence area in France, in southern France. It's peasants eat that bread. It's poor people bread. It's just very simple, and I tasted it, and I was like, "Whoa, this is like Telvor." So first thing I did was I bought two more, got it home, had my mom and dad taste it, and they said, "Yeah, it's pretty close." The next thing we did was we had some friends and family coming over. We had just moved into this house, so our Kashmiri group was coming over, and I ordered like I don't know 2 dozens of those for tea. Just made sure everybody tasted it, everybody liked that, and I started researching what fougasse is, and I learned that it's essentially close to what a bagel is, but unlike a
Yeah.
bagel, you don't add any sugar to it and you don't boil it beforehand. It's just baked.
Right.
So I started making those, but I made those with sourdough. And what that does is that it gets you a different level of chewiness and the taste, which my mom and dad tasted, and my dad was surprised to taste it because he hadn't tasted something like that in years. And the reason is that because even in Kashmir, bakers had started to use yeast. So I spoke with a couple of older people in the family. I spoke with Suresh Uncle, who I mentioned earlier here. And he mentioned, oh, when I was a kid, the bakers used to have a pot of flour bubbling in the back. They used to call it khamir. And to my surprise and research, I found out was that the bakers in Kashmir were using sourdough long before yeast showed up in the area. And that was the original flavor for the things. And that's where I started. Like, so I started developing the recipe. I made it a couple of times on mom and dad. I make a bunch of breads, but making like a fresh tailor always is like it's something that gets cleaned up very quickly in our house. Um, so that's where the baking story comes from, and now it's become quite the side gig now because now it's incorporated as LLC. I sell every other weekend. I sell at the Cary Downtown Farmers Market. I also sell online. And in other side story, that's been a thing that I've always dreamt of is to retire into a small cafe or a bakery once I'm done with my tech job. So I think also think is it's kind of like me training and getting ready for that final retirement plan of mine.
Yeah, and I was definitely going to ask about because I know that you sell and I was going to ask for people who are interested in buying how they can do so. So I want to give you like a second to kind of highlight your online sales stuff because I know like even my family, like my mom doesn't like she likes bagels and stuff, but sometimes if I go to Safeway, it's also just like a sesame seed bagel, but she's like, "Oh, get the Tailor one because it's just such like a familiar taste to people that people crave it." So I'm sure there's people who want it. And hearing that you've done your due diligence and research into this kind of like hyper original recipe, I'm sure there are people who are going to want it. So yeah, feel free to just like plug
So
away.
yeah, plug. Thank you so much. So you can find me on Instagram. I go as Breadwala. It's BREADWAALA. You can also go to breadwala.com. It's going to take you to the same site. There is a link. There is an ordering website behind it. The link's there. Telvors are not on the menu because I keep them hidden. So if you reach out to me on Instagram, you can text me and I'll get you that link. I'll also be happy to share with you. I started writing some blogs on my sales site. One of the blogs is the recipe to a telur. So you don't have to go all the way and go crazy about making it with sourdough. If you just have access to some bread flour and a packet of yeast, I'll send you the recipe. Anybody can make a telur. You just need to put in some time. It's documented, it's listed there. But yeah, you guys can look me up. The ordering website's there. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me on Instagram or text me.
Yeah. And if I'm definitely gonna let my mom know because I make focaccia all the time. And so that's like an ever-present request. I'm also a huge cook, baker. So I make focaccia all the time. And if my mom hears this Taylor recipe thing, it's gonna get added to the rotation.
It's an
But
easy thing. And
yeah, it's
focaccia is something that I tell people like having made breads for about 5 years now. Uh, like the satisfaction to effort ratio, focaccia is the highest in that.
yeah.
The amount of happiness you get out of the least amount of effort that you put in, because focaccia to me is like that. I tell people that's like the easiest bread to get into, and you can always do that. So
Yeah,
if
I've
you,
definitely grown from like simpler recipes. Now I do like an overnight proof and then a second proof in the oven. It's gotten complicated, but it's still minimal effort because it's just sitting in the fridge overnight. Like I'm not really watching, doing anything. Um, I'm curious. So you said that you're definitely making Telvors. Are there any other breads that you have, Kashmiri Kandar breads that you've experimented with, or even if you haven't, like want to get into
oh,
and
I
kind of start to
absolutely,
make?
I just recently visited. I just had a meal at a restaurant. There's a restaurant in Durham called Chini. It's run by this wonderful, wonderful lady by the name of Preeti Was. She's an exceptional chef and restaurateur. Um, she's been nominated twice for the James Beard Award for Southern area. And the naan she's making, there is something, and I'm actually going there tomorrow again. I'm going to ask her because the naan that I tasted there, the moment I had a bite of that naan, I immediately remembered the gyaltsot. So I need to go and ask her what is she doing. There is something, because I think there is some flavor profile or some texture that she's doing, which is bringing us close. So yes, I am very excited about like once my mom and dad are here this summer, I have a bunch of things to experiment with.
Oh
Of
yeah.
course, I'm gonna make a lot of Telvor. I do like the kandur chot is my favorite thing.
Yeah,
That is
same.
something that every time I went to Kashmir as a kid, every time I went to Jammu, we have family there. Is like my breakfast was, it was literally like just a kandur chot, Amul butter. There is no better butter in the world. Let me say that.
Yeah. And
Uh,
keva. You have to have it with keva.
uh, I am so I would have that with so kandur chot, Amul butter, and I would have a warm glass of milk with it.
That's okay. Any
That's
warm
me.
drink. That's
Yeah,
you
that's me.
need something
Yeah,
to
yeah.
melt the butter.
Yes, yes,
That's
yes.
just the best way to get it to work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Kandur Chot and Gyap Chot are two things that are big on my radar. I did recently also look into Katlam because if you zoom out wide enough, Katlam, its constituents are pretty similar to what a croissant is. It's a
Yeah.
flaky pastry. It's layered dough. That's like it's dough and fat, layers of dough and fat, similar to a croissant. It's very similar. So I would love to give a try that. But I think first up, I would love to get the kandur chot and the gyat chot down.
Well, I know that whenever any of those you have perfected and you've gone to the point of where you're selling them, you will have a very, very, very long line
I know.
of Kashmiris
So
waiting to
that's
just purchase them.
one thing that I do wish to do sometime, and I'm just gonna like I'm just putting it out in the ether, manifesting it. Maybe is that at some camp, if I am able to spend enough time and get a group of volunteers with me, is to make a fresh round of Telvor at the camp for the breakfast.
Yeah. And I
It's an
think
easy thing to do. It's just need people, just requires people.
yeah, and we do like a bunch of activities at camp, and I think like doing that as like a group activity, A, will get you people, and B,
Yeah,
it has a beautiful end result, I
of course,
think,
of course.
that
Yeah,
everybody
and that's the thing.
enjoys.
I think so. It's the logistics that would have to be worked out on, like, how do you need that much dough? Do we have access to an oven or something? But definitely something I would love to do. I did do during COVID. I did do like a Zoom session showing people how to make silver. So we have that recorded as well.
That was kind of all I had to talk to you about today. I did want to, before we wrap up, kind of just get a big overarching kind of blanket statement slash advice slash what you have as like a piece of encouragement or growth for anybody listening, especially KP youth, on connectivity with culture, whether it is through active participation in the organization or through food or through anything else, music, arts, whatever it may be. But I'd love for you to kind of give some sort of advice from you, because you have kind of been through this journey of like small group to larger group, and done a lot of different things within that kind of cultural preservation and cultivation.
Sure, that's a lot of responsibility, so I'm going to try my best. I think to start with, I would say explore more of what you don't know. I am still on the journey of like learning a lot more about Kashmiri Pandit history. I don't know anything, and I know that it's very rich. There is a lot of things that we have to learn, and we have to know about our history for us to go forward. Like where the culture comes from, where our things that we do and the rituals come from. So um, be curious. I know a bunch of those rituals sound very weird, and I would detest when my mom would be doing things, but now I miss them. So just note to self again, if I were giving some guidance to my 20-year-old self, I would say like get to learn the language better if you can. There is a lot of poetry that now, because of the access to digital assets, is available easily. Read up on poetry if you guys are big on poetry or arts. There are a lot of books about Kashmiri Pandit heritage that you can read through and find out. Connect with other KP youth. You'll be surprised to find out how many things in common you have with a small group of people that you've never known. Um, Jokes and like funny things that your parents did or said. There's going to be so much that will connect you. Uh, there is so much food culture, and I think that comes from being like a very small group, and I think food is a intrinsic part of the organization. I think it's part of every organization, but I think as Kashmiris tend to uh, give it that much more important, and I think the cuisine is worth that much important. There is a bunch of nuances in the cuisine that I don't see in a lot of other cuisines, even in India or even in the world. There's like some very specific finesse things that you have to learn. Um, so learn about that. Um, I would also say talk to your parents and ask them about like it's not a bad idea to like learn from them about their time growing up, whether it was in Kashmir or not in Kashmir, but how did they keep in touch with the culture or how did they do things differently from their other friends? Because like it is a culture that we are trying to preserve and grow, and we are a shrinking population. I mean, we're a minority within a minority. If you look at the group in the US, at least, we're like a very small group. So, just be curious. Try to learn more if you're interested. Like, reach out to groups. One advice I would give, one thing that I think we talked about earlier is that if you land up in a city where you don't know anybody, talk to your any previous KP or KOA contacts, have them connect you with either the zonal director or the youth rep in the area. This recent incident happened is that somebody whose mom's a Kashmiri Pandit, uh, has grown up in the US, moved to Duke, and he reached out to me on LinkedIn. So social networks for the win. You can go find if you are interested in looking for, you can go find you know the last names. You can go look up people with those last names in your local area, whether it's Facebook or it's LinkedIn. Um, Join the networks, find people, and it's good to know like because it gives you another sense of like another dimension of who you are that you probably didn't know. And yeah, I think yeah, just be curious and embrace where you come from.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We discussed your involvement in KOA from zonal director to VP, youth liaison, but also kind of got a really cool insight into the bread making process and how you're using it to grow your version of the Telvor empire, is what I'm going to call it. And as for this episode, previous episodes, and future episodes, you can find us on Spotify and Apple. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you stay notified of when our future episodes release. And thank you so much. And we will see you next time on Everything Kosher.